Restorative approaches to discipline in Scottish schools are resulting in increasing bad behaviour. I made a video about that recently. This is a follow-on video where I'm looking at the research that apparently is supposed to support restorative practices. It actually does nothing of the sort. So if you don't know about restorative practices, do watch the other video first. There's a link below. If you are interested in finding out more, then do watch this. This might be more for a specialist audience. Maybe if you're a teacher, if you've got a particular interest in education, you might find this very interesting. Now, in education, the latest craze is always backed up with the phrase research has demonstrated. If you look on the Scottish Government website, it refers to a piece of alleged research that confirms that restorative practice is effective. It's quite old, it's back from 2006, but it's still there, presented as the foundational research for this whole approach. I'm going to have a look at it now. Here's one of the conclusions. When introduced in schools with at least a number of receptive staff, and when the initiative was supported by commitment, enthusiasm, leadership, and significant staff development, there was a clear positive impact on relationships in school. That's an interesting comment. If you imagine that said, we've tested homeopathic medicines, and we've found that when they're given to people who are receptive to them and supportive and enthusiastic and committed to homeopathy, they report that there's been an improvement. So you see the problem here. They're saying where people are already predisposed to see the value of this, then they can measure a positive impact on it. Now, in medical research, if you want to assess the validity of some sort of treatment, you always have a placebo control. And the reason you do that is if you give people a pill, a proportion of them will report that there's been an improvement. So what you need to do is you need to give one group a pill that actually doesn't do anything, and maybe 20% of them will say they've got better, they feel better. And you give the actual drug to another group, and maybe in the other group, 30% will say they feel better. So you can conclude from that that actually the drug is actually doing something. With 10% of them, it has actually made a difference. But there's no attempt to have some sort of placebo control group in this research. What would a placebo control group look like? I'm not suggesting they would actually do this, but this is what it might look like. If you went into a school and said, right, you can improve discipline by painting blue spots on the ceiling of your classroom. Now, what would happen is the senior leaders would promote this to the staff. They'd paint blue spots on the ceilings that are in classrooms. They'd be saying how great it was, what a great improvement they've seen, because they're just trying to be positive and promote what they're supposed to be promoting. Then some other staff, if they're taken in by it, they might say, okay, I'll have some blue spots painted in my room. So the staff who have the blue spots painted in their room will be the very open-minded and positive staff who are willing to give this a go, and they'd be the ones who'd be more likely to say it's worked. Right, has it worked? Well, it maybe it put the staff in a more positive frame of mind that actually might have made them teach better. It might have made pupil behaviour improve because the pupils might have seen them, realised what it was all about. Then that might make them improve in some way. It might be the staff are just agreeable. They want to go with the flow and just agree with the senior leaders. It might be that they think that's the way that's going to further their career, etc. But generally speaking, in that situation, with the blue spots, you would find a proportion of staff and pupils would be reporting that this was a successful initiative. Right, what have we got here? Talking about restorative justice. In this view, punishment is the means, restoration is the goal. Right, I disagree with that. Restoration is not the only goal of punishment. Goals of punishment are also deterrence, to discourage other people from engaging in similar behaviour. And the other reason is desert. Punishment is deserved. When someone does something wrong, they deserve punishment. That's what justice is all about. But deterrence and justice go out the window, and restoration becomes the sole criteria of success for punishment. That's why it's so unbalanced. Right, we've got here the Fife approach. Fife was one of the council areas that piloted the restorative approaches. Now, they said restorative approaches are caring, mutually supportive, empathic, engaging, collegiate, non-threatening but challenging, within a framework where responsibility and accountability is made clear and confidentiality respected. Right, so in other words, restorative approaches is just another way of saying that you're sort of a good person who wants the best for the kids. And that's the sort of ethos that's created. I'm very restorative becomes code for saying I'm a nice person. It becomes a virtue signaling exercise. Now, all those vague statements there, no one could disagree with any of them, and yet you can very definitely disagree with restorative approaches and the direction that they push disciplinary processes in. But you can see the way it works. All of these positive adjectives surrounding it, giving the impression that disagree with restorative practice, you mustn't be any of these positive things. Right, what else do we get from 5? This is from the primary schools. All schools need to continue to work to bring parents on board. In other words, parents, or a significant portion of them, were not happy with this approach for the sort of reasons I've outlined, I would imagine. But notice the response is not we need to listen to parents, hear their concerns, and change what we're doing in the light of them. It's we need to educate the parents because we know best about how to bring up children, how to discipline them. We need to teach the parents how it should really be done. To communicate to pupils, staff and parents when a restorative solution has been reached, to avoid nothing has been seen to be done. As I've said, that's a problem with the restorative approaches. Everything's behind the scenes. It's these little counselling sessions, and other people do look on, and they do indeed say, what's happened? Nothing's happened. The advantage of the conventional punishment system is whatever conversations have taken place, you also have a certain punishment's been given, and that calibrates the offence in the minds of the other pupils who hear about it. They say, all right, I realise that was a really serious thing because this action has been taken. And that's helpful to clarify things for the whole school community. Right, another issue they faced. Restorative approaches need to be seen to be fair and just for all concerned. So obviously a substantial number of people were not seeing that. I can quite understand why, because they're not seeing proportionate responses. Everything just results in a mini counselling session. That's again feedback from schools. Some schools need to be aware that renaming punishment exercises, for example, as a consequence, may not make it more restorative. So what's obviously going on here is schools are playing a game. They're trying to be more restorative by using the jargon while actually trying to retain punishments because they're necessary. So they start renaming punishments like a consequence. But the researchers here are seeing through that and saying that doesn't actually change it. And these schools also need to address the role and use of punishments and sanctions. There's lots of talk like that. How do we balance these things? You can see, reading between the lines and sometimes actually reading the lines, that what they're pushing towards is making punishments obsolete. But they just want this ongoing discussion of the place of punishments, and the conclusion is always to be that the place of them is more and more restricted, heading towards them having no place at all. Secondary schools with significant numbers of likely resistors. Right, resistors, that's staff who don't agree with the restorative approach. Again, no concept that we're going to enter into discussion. We're going to hear their concerns and try and produce a more balanced disciplinary approach. Not at all. They're the problem. They're the resistors, and we just have to work out a way of bypassing them and managing them and bringing them into line. One of the problems mentioned in Highland schools was having enough committed, enthusiastic staff to model this approach across the school, which seems to be indicating that a substantial portion of the staff are not enthusiastic about it, and so this has only been implemented by the ones who were enthusiastic, and that will be reflected in the results. When we look at the feedback from teachers, less than half of them returned the questionnaire. Which half will be returning it? The half mainly who are committed and enthusiastic about it, which completely skews the results to the point of making them meaningless. So, will it work with existing discipline systems? There were a few schools in the main secondary schools where restorative practices were seen as challenging to the disciplinary standards of the school and as incompatible with existing sanctions. Challenging to the disciplinary standards of the school. So teachers are seeing sense, but they're being ignored. In a few schools, however, key staff were beginning to explore and looking to overcome some incompatibilities with particular approaches to discipline, particularly those associated with ideas of assertive discipline. That's a bad thing, apparently, assertive discipline. I assume we want inassertive discipline, which does seem to be what they want. Where rules and procedures emphasize a fixed staff authority. Fixed staff authority. So that's a bad thing. What do we want? Part-time staff authority. Sometimes they've got authority, sometimes they haven't. It's up to the kids. Rules. Now, rules are very unpopular these days in schools. They should be guidelines instead, which sound much nicer. So the idea that you say, this is not allowed, and if you do this, there's going to be a negative consequence, you're going to be punished. They want to do away with that completely. So instead of fixed staff authority and rules, we want flexibility and pupil participation. They're beginning to redefine discipline more broadly as relationship management rather than as a procedure for dealing with difficult behavior or disruption. So discipline out, relationship management in. Okay, so when someone steals something or beats someone up or whatever, the primary problem there is we need to manage the relationship and restore the relationship. It's not that someone's done something wrong and deserves punishment to learn their lesson of moral accountability. It's just that the relationship has to be restored. People have to make friends again. Right, can we still use punishment? Very often, restorative practice in the early stages of development sat alongside traditional punitive responses rather than being consciously used as an alternative to these approaches. Okay, so early on, punishments were used. 2 secondary head teachers advocated abandoning punishment altogether. I'm glad I don't work in their schools. Although the staff survey suggested that not all staff in these schools agreed with them. So again, you see the tension between staff with remaining common sense and the way they're being pushed externally towards doing away with punishments. Right, gender analysis. This is interesting. The gender analysis included only secondary staff, as there were very few male respondents in the primary sample, and the primary schools were much more positive about restorative approaches. A greater number of female teachers indicated that they would like further training in using restorative practice. Male teachers were significantly more likely to definitely agree with the statement that it's sometimes necessary to punish pupils. Now, I think it's true that education in general is being feminized at a very high rate. What I mean by feminized is it's been structured to be more in tune with and to emphasize more qualities and attitudes that would in general be more associated with females than with males. If you look at in the family home, for example, maybe it's quite normal for a mum to be more restorative, more pastoral, the talking things through approach, and maybe dad would be more inclined on average in general to put his foot down sometimes and say, no, enough's enough, I'm not having that. This is what's going to happen. This is the consequence of what you've just done. Okay, we're not going to put up with that. But the culture in society is that the ultimate dad is the one that's most like the traditional mum. And that's the way it's happening in schools as well, is that the male teachers are made to feel that their natural approach, which I think can be very effective, particularly with boys, that their natural approach is wrong. And in order to be better teachers, they need to adopt a more female quality-centered approach. Right, interesting question here. These questions here, by the way, nothing to do with the restorative practice. They also didn't compare before and after. This was just a one-shot piece of research. So how this assesses anything to do with restorative practice, I don't know. Anyway, pupils do not achieve their academic potential in this school. Let's see. In secondary schools, 21% of teachers definitely agreed that pupils didn't achieve their academic potential, and 54% agreed. Only 26% disagreed. Quite concerning, I would suggest. It's sometimes necessary to punish pupils. This is interesting. Right, secondary teachers, 77% definitely agree, 21% agree. Doing a bit of maths there, that makes 98% saying that it's sometimes necessary to punish pupils. Only 2% disagree. And yet Education Scotland is pushing the restorative approach, which ultimately heads towards the point of saying that punishments are not necessary. And that's what actually it explicitly says. At some point, they can be replaced with restorative methods. 98% of teachers disagree. But the 2% are having it all their own way. I have had training in using restorative practices. Again, this is the schools involved in this research project. Secondary teaching staff, 68% disagree. So this research is based on schools where 68% of the staff, teaching staff, have not been trained in restorative practices. And then they get responses from less than half of the staff and claim that it's been successful in those schools. I use restorative practice effectively in my work. Now, anyone designing research should realise that's a terrible question. If you ask people whether or not they're good at something, they're going to tend to say, yes, I am good at it. Do you use it effectively? Oh yes, I'm a good teacher. I do use it effectively. So with that skew that's going to make the results more positive, let's see what answers we got from secondary teachers. Definitely agree that they use restorative practices effectively. 4%. Agree, 41%. Okay. Disagree, 23%. Need more information, 32%. This is the research from the less than half of teachers that bothered to reply to the questionnaire, and it's the foundational research for rolling out restorative practice across the whole of Scotland. Hardly convincing. Here are some comments from staff. Have not given any attention consciously to restorative practice. Sounds like another buzz phrase, an initiative to be introduced, have money wasted and then be forgotten when the next big initiative arrives from the USA. That's from a secondary school teacher. Well, I can sympathise with those sentiments, but actually this is worse than just a waste of time. This is something that is seriously harming the effectiveness of schools in Scotland. So I'd suggest to this teacher you do give it some attention and express your criticisms of it. Right, this teacher believes restorative approach works with average pupils, but with more difficult behavioural problems does not seem to be successful. These pupils see it as a weakness and have difficulty talking through and reasoning situations. And the key phrase there is they see it as a weakness. They do. Some pupils respond to what they see as a strong response from staff, assertive, decisive, and leading to consequences rather than the mushy conversation. They see it as weak. The pupils are running riot. Having in-depth knowledge of inclusion restorative practice is one thing, putting it into practice is a different matter. It's sad to watch a school deteriorate. Okay, hardly a ringing endorsement of progress with restorative practice. Right, behaviour has become increasingly worse in our school in the last year, and restorative approaches have been applied by guidance and senior management. But as a principal teacher, I feel these are not working effectively, as I'm still having to deal with the same pupils week after week due to indiscipline. Excellent. I think we definitely need to roll this scheme out across all of Scotland with this resounding success. Right. The ethos has been better. I think this teacher means that the ethos was better than it is now. Zero tolerance to bad manners, breaking of rules, as well as more serious bad behaviour would help. From all staff, inconsistencies abound. So the teacher wants zero tolerance. That sounds to me like they're not happy with just a little mini counselling session as a response to the first instance of any sort of misbehaviour. I think I witnessed management using this technique twice and it failed to solve the problem, and the pupils trying to achieve some level of education are still being disrupted and disadvantaged. Persistent offenders are currently told to say sorry. What is needed is a proper, successful discipline policy which allows the others to get on with their lives in peace. I couldn't agree more. Again, some more comments from teachers. I never use the word punish. This is a very inclusive school. Oh dear, oh dear. I mean, how is punishment uninclusive? Who is excluded by having the concept of punishment? Right, I don't like the word punish. It is sometimes necessary to help improve children's behaviour. So what they're saying there is it's necessary to help improve children's behaviour, but not by punishment. Punishment's a nasty word. That's for bad people. So the question here is, sometimes teachers have to punish pupils, and the pupils have been asked whether they agree or disagree with that. So, do teachers have to punish pupils? 53.6% definitely agree. 39.2% agree a bit. How many disagree? Only 5%. So thankfully there's still lots of common sense among the pupils. But that 5.3% who disagree, if they think that punishment is not necessary, they're the ones who are having the disciplinary systems in schools designed to fit their views. But even the pupils can see that punishment is necessary. So there we are. The research apparently justifying restorative practice does nothing of the sort. Now, this is an important issue. There's lots of fads in education that take a hold, spread like wildfire, despite the fact that they're just absolute junk. The research they're based on is appalling. But it's one thing if you've got teachers getting their kids to do this to get better blood flow to the brain so they're better at maths. Okay, they're wasting their time and it's just completely ridiculous. They're making a fool of themselves. But this is worse than that. This is undermining discipline in Scottish schools, and that's having a very negative effect in lots of different ways. I'm going to make another couple of videos on related issues. I'm going to make one about the rationale for punishment in schools and one about the rationale for punishment in general, because it's also been undermined in our so-called justice system as well. But if you're interested in finding out more, do subscribe to our YouTube channel, and thanks for watching.